I have a problem with midwives. And the thing is that I know for a fact that there's nurse midwives out there that are doing the same thing as my midwife. I know that. I know that because I've met the mothers. So I have a problem with midwives because I feel like I understand where midwives came from. And I do understand the history of what was going on, but that was a long time ago before we had medical care. And women were kind of, it wasn't that we were tossed aside, it was that we just didn't know very much about our bodies, about birth. We didn't know whatever. So it's something that like really bothers me when they always compare themselves to like these old school, like granny midwives, or, you call the midwife and all these different things of like these birth attendants that have all this knowledge that was passed over from the beginning of time, that kind of stuff. But at the same time, this is a different time than what it was even 20 years ago, even 50 years ago, 100 years ago, compared to like medieval times. Like, I feel like they compare themselves to like when we didn't have anything, when we didn't have like pain relief, when we didn't have C-sections, when we didn't have whatever, where basically they were there to like comfort us, support us, massage us, bring us food, bring us water, whatever. Maybe at the time, maybe not water, maybe it was alcohol, because I know in a lot of places they drank a lot of alcohol because water wasn't actually very good. So, I mean, you look at the history, whatever, maybe they were there to tend to certain things, and maybe they could help with certain things like infections or certain things that happen. But there was a lot of things that they literally were there to, like, they're a gatekeeper between life and death, because women did die, babies did die. And if the baby didn't come out, which they did try to find different methods of natural ways to get baby out, if the baby didn't come out and the baby died, mother died too, because we didn't have C-sections. We didn't have the stuff that we know now. And that's part of history, which in that way, I do understand why we have midwives. But that was a long time ago. That was a really long time ago of why we needed these special caretakers that came to our home. We lived in small villages, and we had like one village lady that would go around and, she spent her life that's what she did, was she was tending to children and women and whatever, right? And then she would pass on her knowledge to somebody else. And I do get that. But I think we've come to such a different time that I think they're kind of so outdated that they're sticking with this past history of women. And that's why I think it's dangerous, like so dangerous, is because they're not like believing that where we are now. Like, we should be up to date and up to code of like, hey, you know what? Babies do die, mothers do die. We have to like protect them. We have to safeguard them. Your job should be safety. So as much as you want to support and whatever, I don't understand like this whole midwife thing of like, I get you're supporting, you're empowering, and you're trying to be there, but that also means like there's certain things that are not part of your scope of practice, or there's certain things that you cannot handle because it's an emergency situation. That doesn't mean turn the baby. It doesn't mean get mom on all her hands and like her hands and knees and just see if baby will move enough so you can try to get baby out. If something's going on where you think baby is stuck, if something is going on where you think there's something going on with the cord, if you notice something going on with mom, it is out of your scope of practice. This isn't back in the day when midwives literally were like, I'm here to rub your back until you die, to hold your hand until the moment you and your baby die. We now have these magical things called ambulances. We now have like hospitals and doctors, and
medicine. We have medicine to treat problems. We have anesthesia for going under or, to kill the pain. If you have to do a stat C-section, they can top up an epidural. I don't know if you all, I don't know, Madison, if you've read this book. It's called My Name is Mary Sutter. And it actually is, it's a really good account. The author is a critical care nurse, and her husband is a GP, and I believe he does obstetrics. But it's a story about a young woman whose mom and sister were the people who were not wise women or midwives, but they're the ones that would help women who were laboring and having babies, because no one else could do this. And this is back during the Civil War time in the South. So it talks about women giving birth in, circumstances where there isn't running water and there aren't trained medical professionals. And people would come to these women and they some of them died. And in fact, spoiler alert, the sister dies because she has a difficult birth and her baby is stuck. And they were trying everything they could to try and get the baby out. So when you look at it that way, and you know history, it is not a cool thing to say you're an expert in normal birth, or birth has always been the same, or women have been giving birth for thousands of years. That's not a good line. I don't want to go with someone who just believes, oh, give birth, it's fine. I want someone who understands healthcare and what it means to be able to save a laboring woman and their baby. That's what I want. I want someone who's prepared for all the emergencies and who understands that it's not just, oh, wow.
I'm actually a huge history nerd. And it's kind of ironic that you brought up the Civil War. My daughter literally exists because of the Civil War. I met her through being like a Civil War nerd, and he's a Civil War nerd. And that's how we became friends. And then we wound up dating for a short time and we had a kid together. But history is my jam. It is my thing. And I just the other night, because I was thinking about swollen cervixes, because those are a hugely prevalent thing in the natural birth community, is swollen cervix. And I was trying to do some kind of baseline research about when did cervical exams come into play? Like, who invented cervical exams? When did they invent cervical exams? When was 10 centimeters discovered? When was fully effaced discovered? When did all of that come into play? And I'm having a hard time finding the answers to that. But something I did find is that even since the dawn of midwifery has been a privileged thing for people to have. Midwives didn't serve the poor people in the community. Midwives didn't serve every single birthing mother, unless you were in like a small remote village where there's really only like 30 to 40 women. So it would be rare for more than 2 women to be having a baby on one given night. But even you go back to King Henry VIII, his wife, Jane Seymour, she died because her baby was dying inside of her, and the midwives couldn't do anything about it. So they had a physician on standby who wound up performing a C-section on her back in the 1500s, and she wound up dying from that. And the ability to be able to pay a midwife has always been a point of privilege, unless you live in a community where midwives are readily available and back in history. And even midwives back then would turn to physicians and say, we can't do this. And yeah, we're talking about the baby that Jane Seymour was birthing. I think it was Jane Seymour that was his 3rd wife, who produced his, did I get that right? Okay, so Jane Seymour, she came after Anne Boleyn. So he had already had a daughter with Catherine of Aragon. He already had Elizabeth I, and he needed a boy. And Jane Seymour produced that boy, and it tore him apart because she was able to give him a son, but even his wealth and power and being the King of England couldn't save her. And to be able to, almost every piece of history regarding midwifery that we have, anything that is documented is almost exclusively through wealthy people, because poor people weren't documenting their medical health. Poor people weren't documenting, most people didn't even know their birthdays or the year they were born. But when you're talking about nobility, you're talking about royalty, you're talking about the affluent members of society, they were tracking everything, they were marking everything, everything was put down in the history books. And those are the stories when you're talking about, at least in like the European nations in the Middle Ages and before, anything we have involving midwives involves privilege, involves class privilege. And that is still rampant in American midwifery today, is class privilege.
Bye.